I'd like to thank our friends at Sardine for making today's episode possible. They have over 4,000 signals. From device, email intelligence, telco data, and AML monitoring, the Fraud Squad is here to help you make the right decisions. They're shipping new features weekly to help the fight, and they are never afraid to jump right in there with you and make sure you have the rules and models you need. The best way to learn more about Sardine is live, and that is why they are hosting Fraud Squad meetups in Palm Springs, Charlotte, and San Francisco. Visit their site at www.sardine.ai or join their newsletter to learn more about those. For those of us on the conference circuit this season, be sure to check them out at these shows. And of course, visit them at booth 210 at the MRC Las Vegas. It's good to have a Fraud Squad behind you, and with Sardine, you get the best Fraud Squad around. Visit them at www.sardine.ai today. Now let's get to the episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Fraud Boxer. I got Soups back, and we're going to tell the story today of Sardine. So how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. Really excited to be on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the official one. Like we, a couple months back, we did the live stream with your 7 predictions. Very well received. A lot of people, a lot of views on that one. So you are a very popular guy, and you have a very popular company that I think a lot of people love to hear stories. They love to hear stories about how things came to be, what prompted the creation of it, because the biggest companies, the things that change the most, always come out and have a good story behind it. People just don't want to just make money. I mean, we all want to make money, but I think the story is always a really good place and really captivates people. So today, I would love to hear your story personally and professionally, and all about Sardine, so my audience can hear all the good things that you guys are doing and why you're doing them. So how does that sound to you?
Sounds like a plan. And by the way, I love how you came prepared with our cap. I should have brought mine as well.
I did this just for you. I took it at the MRC Santa Clara that we were at, and it does look pretty good though. I'm pretty happy with the contrast and all that. So hey, I feel like I'm a part of the Fraud Squad when I'm wearing it.
Literally.
So who are you? And how did you get into this industry and that whole thing? I always start with that, like how did you get into this industry? Because I don't think any of us started out trying to be like, I'm going to fight fraud today. We all have a story of how we wound up, and you come from a crypto background and fintech space, which I think there's a lot more on the line than when we're selling t-shirts on an e-commerce website, when those sorts of things. So that's why I think your story is going to be really interesting for a lot of people. So please.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a little bit about myself. So born and brought up in India, and then I moved to the States in the year 2000, first for getting a PhD from Rice University. My thesis was, believe it or not, on detecting distributed denial of service attacks and how do you scale web servers and make them resilient in the face of DDoS attacks.
Right? All the way back then?
Yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things where I feel like these are like such modern concerns, and like but people like you 20 years ago are working on this, So yeah, please tell me more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what I came up with during my thesis was, essentially an elegant way of detecting bots, right, on the basis of network traffic characteristics or what have you. And then the thesis was all about, hey, can you actually scale up web services automatically in the face of DDoS attacks, right? Because you don't want the services to crumble in the face of a DDoS attack, and therefore take down good users along with it, right? So that kind of led me into my first job out of grad school, which was actually with a network security company. And that network security startup, we were selling into big telcos, detecting, all sorts of cyber threats, botnets, worms, zero-day worms, BGP or other protocol-based attacks like DNS-based attacks, etc. I did that for about 5 years. And then I went into the world of advertising, ad tech, again, with a bent towards fighting the bad guys. So detecting click fraud, right? So that was my next 5 years. Did a stint at many startups and then later at Yelp. And then for the last, I would say 10 years, I've been in the world of payment fraud and KYC AML compliance, right? My first foray in that world was via Coinbase. So I was engineer number 12 over there. So
Oh,
my
wow.
background or my training is as a machine learning engineer. So I wrote up the machine learning algorithms to catch fraud, right? And then built up a team. I had a team of fraud ops. We actually used to call them fraud squad, which is why the term fraud squad comes from. And so I had this fraud squad team, more operational heavy, and then built up the engineering team, machine learning team, data scientists, etc. So stayed there for about 4 years. Then I went to Revolut, which is a neobank out of the UK. I believe the largest neobank in the European region. And I was heading up financial crime for them on the first line. So financial crime, when they say financial crime, it includes fraud as well as AML transaction monitoring, right? So I was doing that. And at Revolut is where then I met my two co-founders, Zahid and Adi. So Zahid was on my team and Adi was heading the US expansion efforts for Revolut. And he's a payments nerd. So we got Sardine started just before COVID hit, so 2020. And the whole premise of Sardine is we are your one-stop shop for all things fraud and compliance. And another way of describing it is that we are building Lego blocks for builders. So we give you Lego blocks for taking care of, fraud throughout a customer's life cycle, right?
Yeah.
At account opening or account funding or when a card is being used. And then we also give you Lego blocks for solving for KYC, AML, transaction monitoring, all the way through to case management, SAR filing.
So I can see, obviously, because we've been working together this quarter on the sponsorship of my show that you're on right now. And I've been learning a lot about all the different pieces that you guys have of your product. And I can see now when you go through your history, like how each time that you spend at these different companies has led to what you have now and how everything all fits together with the cybersecurity stuff, the compliance stuff, obviously, and then the fraud. One of the things I want to kind of go back to, because my show is primarily focused on fraud. Now, I love me some cybersecurity. Don't get me wrong. That's one of my favorite things in the whole world. But when you first saw fraud, was it at Coinbase or was it like fraud in what we know, or was it earlier even?
Oh yeah, no. So my entire career has been around cybersecurity or fraud, spam in some sense or the other. But payment fraud, my first foray in that world was when I joined Coinbase.
Do you remember, did you have any aha moment when you were saw it and you're like, I figured out what they're doing? Because I think, in any sort of crypto sort of environment, I think everything started out with good intentions. Like I was a real big fan of the idea of okay, finally we can make a purchase, nice and easy, peer-to-peer style without having to actually go to the bank or do anything. It's basically a digital transfer of something. And that something has some sort of value at the end of the day. Obviously, a lot of people prefer the anonymous aspect of it and no real who bought it situation. But I thought the idea, I think for me, where I always liked was the idea that I could send peer-to-peer money without having to step foot into a bank. Because, even in the world before Venmos, before Zells and those sorts of things, it was, how do we send money? Splitting the check at a restaurant always comes to my mind as either one person had to pay or you had to ask them to split it 15 different ways. It'd be so much easier if we could just be like, hey, I'll pay you here. I'll give you this, and then split the check that way in a digital way. So you don't have to be worried about how much cash you have, what you're going to buy, how your night's going to go, what you're going to want to, those sorts of things. But coming back to, the good intentions of what crypto was meant to be and how it was to deregulate and decentralize everything. When it comes with any sort of, the word deregulation always comes some sort of bad actors in some way that are trying to find an exploit and to take advantage and make it more than what it was intended to do. Do you have any thoughts about that or any opinions about that or any stories that you could possibly share about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The world of crypto is always the first world to see your advanced threats or advanced fraud attacks, right? And the reason is that if I'm sitting on a cache of stolen cards or stolen bank accounts, the best thing I could buy is actually crypto because it's fungible, it's instantly transferable, and it's highly liquid, right? So in the old days, right, like 10, 15 years ago, I would walk into a Best Buy and buy a smart TV. And now, like in the world of like digital assets, right? So crypto is kind of like the bellwether over there. But uh, crypto is not unique in that. The same attack forms you also see at fintechs, right? Because the very act of loading money into a fintech wallet, is almost like you're buying a digital asset, right? It's very similar in that regards, right? So you could load money into a fintech wallet, get a new virtual card issued at that fintech, and then go start spending on that virtual card, right? And that world of digital assets is not very dissimilar from gift cards or online gaming and gambling wallets either, right? Gift cards, again, you come from that world, Jordan. So like we can jam on all the attack vectors they see. So you are basically buying a gift card using a stolen card and then trying to use a gift card to buy another gift card and so on, right?
Tumble along, it's like literally money laundering with the tumbling in the dryer right there. Yeah. I mean, even how like you and I got more connected was, like you hired one of my old bosses from when I worked at Gift, Chrisen over there, and he works for you guys now. I believe he's on the compliance side with you guys. But I remember, like, I think back to those days is like we sold gift cards. And there's nothing unique about selling gift cards. But what was unique about us selling gift cards is we did allow the actual purchase of the gift cards using Bitcoin. Yeah, when we were super early on that, I believe they started taking it in 15. I had joined in 16, like early 16. And you're right, like the sophistication that comes with like people that are buying cryptocurrency like on a regular basis is higher than the average user. So they have more technology knowledge at their fingertips on how they can bend the system, is how I always think of it, like bend the system to their will and push the line on it. But you would see people trying to exit these coins that they got, and we don't know where they got them. That's for the ledger to decide, but try to exit them out into real currency. Because you could think of a gift card as basically money transfer at the end of the day. That's really what it is. A gift card's a gift card. Like when they have it, they have it. We can cancel the gift card, but somebody's still out the money. And usually they turn it around so fast, it's instant. So you have to be aware of the risk that you're taking when you're accepting those sorts of things. And like a lot of people like to think, like businesses that take Bitcoin, I think Wayfair was like one of the first big ones that took it, or maybe it was Overstock. But one of the things that everybody loved about it was you can't charge back a Bitcoin. But for us at Gift, it was when we're selling these large amounts of gift cards to people that are paying with Bitcoin, it's like, where are these gift cards going? Like, of course, we have the regular laws that we have, like $2,000 a transaction, 10,000 a day, and you want to sell as much as you possibly can, but where is this money coming from? Where is it going? Are we going to get caught up in the compliance sorts of things? And there's a lot that goes in to thinking about when you're taking Bitcoin, because a lot of people just think it's another payment method. You could just convert it to fiat currency if you're accepting it on your side real quick. But like there is still some responsibility of where the origin of the token is. Does that make sense? Or am I just kind of going crazy here?
It's actually the same. So the crypto and gift cards, right? It's very similar in that regards because, gift card is almost like cash. Crypto is almost like cash.
Yeah.
Right? So, you could take crypto and use Bitcoins to buy Ethereum and use Ethereum to buy something else. And you can keep sort of chaining it together. Once it's out, the key is that once it's out, it's out. Kind of like the same way you could use a prepaid card to buy a Target gift card, use a Target gift card to buy a Macy's gift card and so on. And you cover your tracks, right? But the key commonality between both of them is that it's instant, right? There's no way to recover the proceeds, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the crux is. And you have to be really, really, really good at fraud in order to stop fraud at a cryptocurrency exchange or a gift card exchange. And therefore at Sardine, we like to say that, if once you grow up in a tough neighborhood, right, you learn a trick or two. In other words, if we can solve for fraud or a crypto exchange or a gift card exchange, then we can certainly solve for it at a fintech or a bank or an e-commerce merchant or a marketplace.
Yeah. And I'll say, like, when I left Gift and went to a shipped goods place, like, just to your point, it's so nice being able to stop that transaction or
Yeah.
stop that item before it ships out. When, like, in
Exactly.
crypto
But
and
one
gift
thing
cards, it's gone, and that's
Mhm.
such a good point. I think back to the days at the Gift too, again, for this conversation, where, us canceling orders up front, 30% of all the orders coming through was not crazy. And I think for a lot of traditional e-commerce, digital goods people, like, canceling that percentage of orders would be crazy. Like, that'd be bonkers. But for us, like, that was normal. That's just the amount of attacks that were attempted on that. And coming out of that, to your exact point, when you grow up in that tough neighborhood, everything else is pretty easy. It's pretty easy to spot. It's pretty easy to stop because you have the luxury of time on your hands, and you have the luxury of seeing sophistication that, like, the majority, I think, of actual fraudsters don't have the level of sophistication that you see on those types of marketplaces. So yeah, so good on you guys for doing that. So let's talk about Sardine, and let's talk about what's different. Like, obviously, we just went over earlier the different pieces that you have. So you are a more end-to-end solution. You get the cybersecurity, you have the compliance, you have the fraud, the transactional fraud. So tell us all about Sardine and what sets you apart and why you guys are better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, so what truly differentiates Sardine are a couple of things, right? So one is that uh, we are one API, one contract, one platform for solving all your fraud and compliance needs, right? And then the second point is that we built our own behavior biometrics / device intelligence solution. So we go super deep into tracking consumer behavior when they're opening up an account or they're adding a card or making a purchase. We look at how they type, swipe, scroll, move the mouse, hold the phone. We look at their network traffic, accelerometer, gyroscope, very advanced telemetry data, and use all of it to catch fraud. And going back to the first differentiator, we realize that the world of fraud and compliance, if they share common tools, their job gets actually much better, right?
Good
So what
point.
we have done is, we have one rule engine, one machine learning engine, which can power both fraud detection as well as AML transaction monitoring, right? And you can escalate cases between a fraud team and a compliance team. Compliance team can escalate cases to the BSAML officer all the way through to SAR filing, right?
Are you guys
And it keeps.
are you guys pulling in, like, known sanctioned persons and sanctioned countries data and all that
Yeah,
for your compliance pieces?
we are. Yeah. So we do full CIP or customer identification program, right?
Oh,
So we would do sanction screening, negative news screening. We also do nightly monitoring. Let's say a certain individual has been onboarded and they're not in a OFAC or SDN or a PEP list, but they might actually show up a few days from now. So we do nightly polling as well. And we also do a lot of what we call progressive KYC, right? So for the fintechs and the banks that we work with, we will help them onboard a new customer using SSN checks. So we'll detect if an SSN
oh
is
wow.
stolen or it's synthetic SSN. And if we think using our machine learning algos that this is likely a stolen or synthetic SSN, then we'll step them up into documentary KYC as well. So the like driver license, passport verification together with liveness checks.
We have these services in different places. Like, we buy, like, a product like Bridger from LexisNexis, for example, to do the OFAC list. Then we buy an IDV tool, whatever that may be. We have a bot tool that sits up front. And then, like, we have, of course, our transactional fraud tool. And I will say,
Mhm.
almost every place I've ever worked, those are always different tools. They're never one tool. So they have their own things. And you know what, to even go a step further, like, a lot of times the teams that are running those tools are completely different people, and they may or may not talk. So much in this industry, we've been talking about having your cybersecurity and your fraud teams, like, blend together a little more, but I would say it's still the majority of companies. It's not that. And then you have, like, compliance teams that might sit more, like, on the banking side, the treasury side of the business versus sitting in any sort of tech side for bot prevention, security, InfoSec, or any of that. So having those fragmentations can lead to a lot. Like I even here at my company, like we see a lot of crossover from like what my tools are doing versus what like some of our InfoSec tools are doing around like account create and ATO prevention and things like that. So it is very, very fragmented. And our two tools that we use in each one of those places do not talk to each other at all. Like even if we wanted them to, we'd have to pull it internally and then send it back, at the end of the day. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And then you lose out on those efficiencies of scale, right? So, so some examples I can share would be that compliance teams, they would like to have access to more data often, or have access to more machine learning, but they oftentimes don't, right? So therefore, if you have one platform which is powering both fraud teams and compliance teams, then compliance teams are going to benefit from it as well, right? So therefore, in the case of Sardine, we have one rule engine and one machine learning platform, which can help you create AML typologies as well as rules for detecting fraud, right? And the rule engine is low code; it allows back testing of all the rules to see how many
really?
times
So I could test a new rule and say what would have happened over the last 6 months, or something like that.
Yep, totally. Yeah. So long as your data is within the Sardine platform, you could actually do scenario planning, right?
I think people underestimate how useful that is. I remember back in the days when if you made a rule change, you could only test it going forward. So you could put it in like what they call listening mode now. But having a sandbox environment where you can test against historical data to see if you would have caught the ones that you really wanted to, it would have been a huge game changer back in my days. I know like some of the folks have been doing that more recently, but to build it forward thinking is the right way to do it. And one of the things, I got the hat on, we talked about the fraud squad. One of the things that like, as I've been working with your team over the last few months here has been your team's willingness to help, to make sure that the partnership is successful. And that's, I think, a little more unique. And we'll talk about that in just a second, because historically, like I've bought tools and then I have to buy a pro services package to make sure that the tool works. And that always kind of rubbed me a little wrong. I felt like if I'm spending, $500,000 on your tool, like help me make it work. But so they're like, yeah, for another 120 grand, I'll help you make it work. So what are your opinions on that? And why did you guys choose to do it your way?
That's that's a great point. So we actually almost work as an extension of your fraud team or a compliance team. So what we offer our customers is, our team of account manager, data analyst, machine learning engineers, they'll meet with you on a regular cadence, right? And they will actually propose new rules as well, right? And they'll work hand in hand with you to actually create those rules, shadow test them or back test them. And they may, they're constantly tracking your metrics, right? Like, is your fraud rate creeping up too high? Is your conversion rate going low? So we almost act as an extension of your teams, and which is why we use the word fraud squad, right? So we are your external fraud squad, right?
And I think that's super key. Like, every day we see new people join our industry, which is fantastic. But at the same time, it's scary because that means fraud's growing and more people are trying to join the industry. But I think, it can be, especially with the sophistication of tools these days, it used to just be super easy. If conditions all day long was everything, and now like the transactions happen so fast and the changes in the behavior happen so fast that if you're not doing it with a computer, you're not going to be successful. But as a new person joining the industry, it could be super overwhelming to not even know, like everybody starts with like, we got to charge back, figure out why we got to charge back. And then you start peeling back the layers. Well, we shipped it. This name doesn't match on this credit card versus what they said on the thing. Let's go to a country that's completely different than the credit card. We all start peeling back those individual layers. And then you start to really figure out what you're doing, but you may or may not know what you're looking at. And one of the things like this fraud industry, especially with like the MRCs being the heart of it, is like the community that comes with it, and having the people to help you that have seen it before. and help
Mhm.
you know what you're looking at. But with you guys, you get those people, the fraud squad, right? That have seen it and know what to look at that can help. And I think a lot of other companies either don't give you that or charge for that, or kind of just. I remember when I first started, I was literally given a computer and told, "Go stop fraud," and I figured
Yes.
it out. But like,
Yeah.
it'd be a lot more frustrating today, if you know what I mean. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, there's an interesting realization I've had, which is that we don't teach fraud or fraud fighting in universities, right? So like in fact, we don't even teach payments in universities, right? So
That's a
everyone
good
has to
point.
come, right? You come into into a payments company, and then you learn payments, and then you learn fraud, right? So because of that very reason, when I was first introduced to the world of payments, 2015, there were all these acronyms, right? Nurture return code R10, R01, all these chargeback codes, right? So what I then did was I actually reached out to other colleagues of mine who were heading risk at other places. And I realized, okay, there's only one way to learn about this new area, which is to just learn from each other. So I started an initiative which we called Risk Salon, right? So Chris used to
Hmm.
come to that, and we quickly grew it to like 1,000 plus people, right?
Wow.
And we would hold like monthly meetups, just meeting each other, like discussing how to fight fraud, et cetera, right? So that was the only way to learn. Right?
I think that that's an excellent idea too, because, you know, especially in the world of work from home these days, where so many people are
Yeah.
working from home, globalized workforce is like being in the room with other people and telling the stories is such a good way to learn. Like I could tell a story all day. Like I do, like on this show, I tell stories all the time on the other shows that I do, even on the town hall that I just did before we recorded this. Like I was telling stories about some things that we're seeing. And you don't know who else is experiencing that until you talk about it. And then
Mhm.
some of the things that they might have done to solve it, if they're seeing it, might be a different approach. And like they could learn from me or I could learn from them. There's been plenty of times like going to things like the MRC or going to the mag. Is I really I get validated with what I'm seeing is what other people are seeing. So I'm not like super crazy and like imagining things, but also learning like of different ways to approach a problem instead of just like my way, which like, a great example of that for me was like honeypotting. Like for so many years, I wanted to just stop it from happening, but there's value in baiting a trap and figuring out where they're going to go next. What's the next attack going to be? And you don't have, doesn't mean let them through, but like set kind of a trap or whatever that may be, if that be suspending an account or making them feel like they got something done. But figuring out where their next attack is going to be is so valuable, when just hard blocking somebody and taking it away from them might be detrimental to what your overall approach is. And I think that like getting people together and just having those discussions is super cool. I wish there was more of them. Like a lot of them, I know you guys do them up in like in the Bay Area a lot. There's not a lot that happen in the LA metro area. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of people that do fraud fighting in LA, but I've been talking about trying to put something together. So maybe soon.
We should jam on it together. So we have now recently started doing fraud squad dinners, right? So we have like a
Seen
group
that.
of group of fraud and compliance leaders sitting together, like 20 or 25, and it's single threaded discussion over one or two topics and the Chatham House rules, where uh, any discussion cannot be attributed to the person, but it's for the common knowledge.
Okay.
And we've been
I like
holding it
that.
like monthly. We're actually planning to do one in Palm Springs. We should talk about doing one in LA. Yeah.
Yeah, let's absolutely do that. I think like there are, I mean, I joke around that there's not a lot of us, but there are like, we have some large companies down here and there are people. I've done like a dinner before, one time. And I would say that there were some heavy hitters in the room that like definitely I would love to have a more regular cadence with a more like a more how do I put it properly? A more formalized discussion, some guardrails on it, because that was just super free form. Everybody was just in the room. Everybody was talking about what they did. We had trust and safety people, we had fraud people, we had payments people. But I think like if we had, I really like the idea of having a topic and then we discuss that topic, especially with like, I don't know what you guys are saying. We can talk to you. Let's talk about this. Like We on my side aren't seeing as much credit card fraud as we used to see. We are seeing, of course, it still exists and it's still growing
Mhm.
at the same rate the business is growing. Like it's kind of static. But what we're seeing is like scams happening a
Yep.
lot, and just abusive behavior, like monetizing a site in a way that isn't monetized. Now, of course, we see, like you talked about earlier, like Google AdWords, click abuse, those sorts of things, or people set up
Mhm.
all those and destroy our Google AdWords accounts. But people setting up fake websites, redirects,
Mhm.
affiliate abuse, all of those things, if you combine that, is valued at more losses walking out the door than credit card fraud is, by like
Mhm.
a lot, by exponentially. So what do you think? What are you seeing like, in those sorts of things? Like what are you guys seeing in is happening now? I know we talked about the seven, but let's bring it back
Yep.
here to this one.
Yeah. No, actually, that's something similar to what we are seeing as well. So uh, I'll give you two thoughts over there. So number one, with the rise of faster payment methods, right? Like Zelle in the US and soon to come RTP and FedNow. My thesis is that dollars being lost to scams is gonna eclipse what we lose to credit card fraud, and we've seen that happen in the UK as well, right? Uh, and that's why we we like to say that these faster payment methods are actually very similar to crypto because it's instant
Yeah.
and it's not recoverable. So that's where Sardine has been able to help many banks and merchants, etc., with stopping scams because oftentimes the scammer is actually calling up the victim and they have them on the phone, right? So we can detect if an active call is in session when you're doing a
Like that.
transaction.
That's good.
Or, yeah, or, the victim is sometimes instructed to install a tool like TeamViewer, AnyDesk, Citrix. These are remote desktop or remote screen sharing tools. And the attacker often then takes control of the victim's screen and then starts moving the mouse, etc. They can actually convince the victim to do KYC, to open up an account at a fintech, right? Or make a transaction on their behalf. So if you think about it, like it's going to be the victim's IP address, their device ID. So everything will check out. It'll be their KYC as well. The only thing that is different is that somebody else was moving
Hmm.
the mouse on the screen. So again, if you have Sardine's SDK embedded in your account opening or checkout flows, we can help you detect multiple people moving the mouse together, right?
That's
To
pretty
stop
cool.
scams.
That's pretty cool there. Like we had our big kickoff for my company
Mhm.
where all the directors got together and we just had a big like meeting. Everybody talks about what they're working on this year, how 23 was, how it's where 24 is going to go. And one of the things that like our CEO specifically brought up was like, and when it came to like IT security, which is different than what we're talking about essentially, but I think the commonality is the same. He said, what is the only part that no matter how much we invest in security is the only part that will fail every time, and it's the human.
Mhm.
The human is always
Yep.
the weakest link, and that's why I think like we saw this carding go up for so many years, and then we as like fraud professionals got so good at identifying and stopping it that then we see the rise of the scam again. It goes back to old school romance scams, just plain social engineering, the police scam where you like, we're going to arrest you unless you bring, $10,000 worth of gift cards today, those sorts of things, which is playing on people's literal emotions, is back to
Mhm.
the tried and true, the same stuff they've done forever. Like we used to call them con men back in the day. And now the con is back and we just call it scams. And they're using, instead of having them bring a big pile of money, we're having them use Zelle, we're having them soon to be fed now and all those sorts of things to make it happen. And they start small and then they go big. I was just reading today, the the New York Attorney General just sued Citi and told them that they need to start beefing up their security around the instant payments situation. I'm assuming that they're talking about Zelle. They didn't name it by name necessarily, but I'm assuming that's what they mean.
Mhm.
But like you and I know, and we talked about it on our seven predictions that you had, that like in October, there's going to be a little bit of liability shift 50-50 on the sending bank and the receiving bank. And that's going to probably change even the speed of that process. It's slowing it down a little bit and seeing where they go with that. So what are your thoughts on all that? I know I just went on a big long rant there.
Nothing to add over there, but actually I do want to go back to the other thing that you did mention, that how you said that you guys are seeing more affiliate marketing scams, right? So one of the observations that we've had is that, there is a kind of like a green field over here around like seller fraud or merchant fraud, right? Where a lot of companies have focused on consumer side of the fraud, but in marketplaces, not much focus has been given to seller side of the fraud.
Yeah.
So that is what we've been focused quite a bit on that, right? So we are working with various marketplaces into identifying, are these sellers truly who they say they are, right? So, and again, because of our roots in the world of KYC, right, we can bring to bear KYC or KYB processes into place, as well as identifying using a variety of other signals, right? Like when was the domain name first registered for this merchant, or looking at does the identity of the business owner match the phone number identity as registered at the telco, right? And again, look at behavior when they're opening up an account. Then did they copy paste all the details, or did some of the details like address, etc., get autofilled, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, we can bring all these signals to bear and help detect a lot of the seller side or merchant side fraud. Right?
I think that the people that aren't from a marketplace, it's interesting. It's an interesting space because, especially like newer, smaller marketplaces, like they want to have people selling things to other customers, but that leads doors open to bad actors where like they create fake accounts, fake seller profiles, list something that doesn't even exist for like $10,000, go on the customer side themselves, buy that item for $10,000, cash out and move on. That's why you see like a lot of marketplaces are holding payments, but like that's not a good user experience. At the end of the day, you don't want to hold the vast majority of people's payments that are like, especially like on like Etsy stores or things like that. You don't want to hold payments for the vast majority of people just because a couple. Like you need to be able to identify like who's a legitimate seller and who isn't, so that you don't have to hold those payments, so you don't have to have a bad customer experience. And another one that I've seen recently too is like people that rent like trucks or vehicles and things like that, where they pretend to be businesses too. And they'll either run off with the whole entire shipment or run off with the vehicle and do something with it that, again, is back to KYC. But like, I think so many people think of KYC as like you're applying for a mortgage and it asks you 15 different questions, about like, are you here? Have you ever lived at this address? What school did you go to? All that stuff, really friction filled KYC, or even like, I mean, you guys, you talked about IDV with liveness checks and things like that. But I think that those KYCs have always been so blanketly applied where you could use a tool like you guys to more strategically decide when it's necessary to do any sort of step up authentication. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one other thought I had around this topic was that, you're absolutely right. Like a lot of this marketplace fraud is actually collusion, right? Like same person acting as a merchant as well as a buyer. And again, like if you think about it, everyone always makes a mistake somewhere. And we like to say that, every fraudster has a tell, right? Oftentimes it's the simplest things, right? Like if I am acting as a merchant as well as a buyer, I may make a slip and I may actually reuse a device ID or reuse an IP address. Even if I was using a VPN while signing up or pretending to be a merchant, I forget to turn off my VPN when acting as a buyer, right? So what we do at Sardine is that we look at, because of a strong foundation in device intelligence, behavior biometrics, we identify devices, re-identify devices, identify incognito windows. We can also pierce through proxy and tell you the true IP behind it, or we can look behind a VPN and tell you what is the true country or the true location. And then we also have a network graph, which allows you to investigate and see if this merchant and the buyers, they all share common identifiers, right? Are they actually really the same person, right?
I like that. Like I remember years and years and years ago, this is before everything was really sophisticated. I had this one user, it was when I worked for Fandango. They were really good. You were using a botnet. So it was always Comcast internet was always the internet, but you can't just hold Comcast against everybody because a lot of people have that, But so it was always a different computer, always a different like a device fingerprint, always Comcast. But the one thing they always did, and always the right, like the browser language was correct. But the one thing that they did is however they were configuring the device, it always had registered as 45 fonts, which was like, for a computer, having 45 fonts is not enough fonts for a modern computer at all. And I remember that was the only way that I could find these guys, because they thought they were clever, but I was getting them on the font count every single time. And then I remember, they got me once back too, though, because then I was like, well, if it's less than 45 fonts, fail the transaction. And then like the third one after that was 46 fonts. Like, so they figured out that like I was getting them on that one thing, but it's a good point is like, people are clever enough that they can get by most things that we historically have relied on, but they always slip up in one way, shape, or form that like we can get them. And I always said like doing like continuous validation is, it comes back to honeypotting again. Is like, let's say you want to block a device, credit card, or email. Okay. So you want to block one of those things. So what you would want to do in my world, this is an old school thing I did, was you don't necessarily fail them if they're using it, but you don't let it finish the transaction. So they don't really know what's going on. But then when they get the decline message, they'll come back and they'll drop one of them. And then you'll have two more that you can then figure out where they're going. But this third one will switch back to something else. So now you have the new thing that they're going. And then they'll switch like this one, and you'll always find one thing that they messed up on and they left the same. And that's how you can kind of just follow them around, and they can really piss them off if you're just blocking it every single time so that they can't get through, but they don't know that you're doing it. It's just not successfully completing at some point. So, yeah.
Yep. That's a fun story. I love it. In fact, some of the things that we commonly see, like they slip up on, would be they're using a VPN, but they forgot to turn off or readjust the time zone on the computer. Yep. So the time zone would still be in Nigeria when they were pretending to be in the US, right? And also screen resolution is a common thing, right? They forget that they're pretending to be a mobile, but the screen resolution is that of a desktop for whatever reason, right?
I got them on those too. A secondary screen registered as like super like 640 like resolution from like 97, and I was like, nobody's using that these days. There's no way. A computer wouldn't even have internet.
Yeah, the key is looking for anomalies. So what we did at Sardine is that, like as I was telling you, we bring in a professional services team helping our customers. One of the ways we are helping them is that we have an anomaly engine, which is looking at, all your traffic, like sign up traffic, payment traffic, transactional traffic, and saying, if there's a particular pattern, right? Like a new screen resolution popping up, or, like a new geo, a new IP network prefix popping up. And then we automatically generate an alert, a Slack alert, which goes to the customer. And then we can go and create a new rule using that. Right?
I think that's super important there too, because one of the things that I've been giving feedback for a lot of people as I've gone through this is like, my fraud tool's job is to alert me to a problem, even if I haven't seen it. So surfacing sorts of things that I should be looking at is so crucial, because I might not even be looking for that sort of thing. But if it's like, hey, you should take a look at this, we feel something's wrong here, that's so valuable. And that's where like, I think that AI in the practical application outside of Gen AI is like a couple of things that I'm really loving in AI is like the summary reviews on like sites that have thousands and thousands of reviews, people like this, people like that. Like, I think that's a good practical application. But applying AI to things like queues is such a smart way. Is like, you can have 10,000 orders queued up, but these 800 are the most relevant, I think, that you should be looking at, because these are the ones that have the biggest thing. These other ones over here are just like, they're noise, but these are the ones that this is something you should look at. And that's where I think like the AI and like the machine learning stuff is really going to really affect our daily lives in a more compelling way than just deciding the orders, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
So
Absolutely.
I have a couple of questions that have been listed here that I was supposed to talk to you about. So one of them is, what is your opinion, since I just said both the words, on machine learning versus Gen AI? So what is that? What is the difference to you? What does it mean? What's the differentiator?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think when it comes to fighting fraud, right, I think machine learning is more than sufficient, right? But when it comes to automating manual processes, right, so that's where we think we should be using Gen AI. So I'll elaborate a little bit further. So the workhorse algorithm for all machine learning is cat boost, right? It's the common algorithm that every machine learning engineer uses for solving for fraud, right? It's a decision tree based supervised machine learning algorithm. It's more than sufficient, right? You have labels coming from chargebacks that you've seen in the past, and then you train a supervised machine learning model to find lookalikes, essentially, right? And there are cases where machine learning or supervised machine learning doesn't work, which is that sometimes it's not fast enough to catch on to a new fraud ring.
Yeah,
Right? Which is
they'll
where
rip
they
you
need
before that gets caught. Yeah,
exactly. So therefore, that's where you need unsupervised techniques like anomaly detection, right? Where you are looking for anomalous patterns spiking, and then you create a rule to actually, not let that fraud ring get bigger, right? And then, well, because chargebacks, they only arrive after like 2, 4, 5, 6 days, right? Like the 95th percentile would be like 7 to 10 days for most companies, right? So by the time you get the chargebacks, it's going to be too late to train a new model, which is why you need in that interim period, like a solid rules engine, right? To catch fraud rings. And then you take a machine learning model, improve it to keep catching those rings going forward. But now Gen AI or LLMs are not good at math, right? LLMs are good at, pattern matching. They're good at predicting the next word that you would say in a sentence, right?
yeah,
So in that part, they're really, really good at automating tasks, right? So the way we use Gen AI inside our Sardine platform are, the following. So one is that when we need to review a case, then we would often find that the case reviewer is oftentimes still Googling the individual, still clicking on their, on the business name and going to the site and collecting info. So what we did was we said that, okay, we'll automate all of that using Auto GPT, right? Second thing we did was that, you're trying to summarize case notes when you're doing a SAR filing. So we do text summarization using Gen AI. Then the third thing we do is that we built a co-pilot. So the co-pilot is like, a chat-like experience in our dashboard. You have a head of risk co-pilot where the head of risk can come in and ask, hey, Finley is our chatbot's name. Hey, Finley, what is my, the health of my fraud system today, right? Or what are the new rules I should be creating, right? And then it'll actually go and look at the past anomalies and come back and do recommendations for rules, right?
that's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I like that a
the
lot.
other and then the other co-pilot we made is, an analyst co-pilot. So you could ask it questions like, hey, Finley, why is this session, I give it a session ID, marked as high risk, right? And then it'll actually go and look at all the hundreds of rules that got fired, pick the right one, and explain it back to you, right?
That's really cool too there. Like, I mean, a lot of times people don't always, like, you would see the list of rules of why something is queued up, but on some of the new stuff, it's been my complaint on some of the automated tools that run a more automated system where you aren't really writing rules. It'll just say decline because of high risk, and it'll say like bad IP or something. It doesn't tell you like the more granular reasons. Yeah, the IP is bad because we've seen it used 15 different times today across 6 different merchants, and using 23 different credit cards. That sort of thing is useful just so you have like an idea of what types of attacks are happening and why orders are queued up. Like I have a client that I work with, and that's their biggest complaint is they have orders that are flagged as high risk by the system that they're using is more it's built into the gateway, but it's like they have no real like they'll have things that'll score as a 0 to 100 scale. They'll have things that'll score 9 and say high risk, but they'll have things that'll score 80 and be like no fraudulent factors detected. And they're like, this isn't helping me in any way because there's no insight into why is 80 bad, but not in this time. And then 9 is good historically, but not this time. Like there's no real data, and having a cool little, like a more natural bot to be like, hey, what am I supposed to be looking at here? Like, tell me. Same thing that I do with like my staff. I'm like, what am I supposed to be looking at here? Like, tell me what's going on here. And it's super helpful. So I like that. That's cool. That's really cool.
Well, thank you.
So I have one more question that I believe your team put on these notes, by the way. So these are coming from your people. And we already, because the other one was faster payments, faster fraud. We already talked about that one. But the other one is omnichannel merchants entering the digital world since the pandemic. So I think a lot of us have seen it happening, but for the people that haven't, tell us a little bit about what you guys are seeing when they get ripped because they never thought about fraud because they all had EMV.
Right. Yeah. So I think the thing you're saying is that today, especially precipitated by the pandemic, right? Like you previously for retailers, their POS systems were not really truly connected with their online purchasing systems, right? Now that leads to like some new forms of fraud, right? Which is buy now, pick up later type fraud patterns,
Opus and all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So basically I might actually order a smart TV on bestbuy.com and I actually don't even show up to pick it up. I of course bought it using a stolen card, right? I hire a mule and the mule shows up to pick it up, right? And then I'm sitting in the parking lot waiting for the mule after the mule is picked up, then do the handover, right? And we talked about this during the prediction session, right? So my prediction is that to solve for these types of cases, especially in high ticket items, right? You would increasingly want to double check person's ID, kind of like how Apple does it already, right? Like in an Apple store, you buy something, you do show up, then ask to see the card you use, or then ask to see your ID, right? So I feel like, more and more retailers will have to like verify your ID when you make the purchase maybe, and then match it with the ID that you show when you're actually picking it up, right?
Yeah, which is super friction, but I mean, it's just the world that we live in. Apple is fortunate that, like, again, back to their closed ecosystem, that if they do figure out they're wrong, they can disable the whole device. But usually it's been parted out or ripped apart or resold to an unsuspecting person by then. And it's that person's problem to deal with. And again, the criminal has fenced it and gotten rid of it. Yeah, good times. So as we wrap up here, we don't, like, is there anything else that we should really know about Sardine? Like, I mean, we've been talking about it. We talked about the 7 predictions. We talked about some of the really cool things you're doing. For everybody, www.sardine.ai. Call them, get a demo from the Fraud Squad. Anything else you'd like us to know about it,
The main takeaway I would say that everyone should leave with is that, if you have a sophisticated fraud problem, or you're looking to sort of like consolidate your fraud or compliance providers, then you should call us up, because that's exactly what we do. We're here to help. We cover a broad surface area when it comes to a product stack, but the intent always is that we can that we are modular, right? You can get started with one Lego block, right? That Lego block could be improving your fraud or improving your compliance, and then later we can help you with other Lego blocks that we offer.
So we could add on like the KYC, add on the AML, add on the cybersecurity piece. So excellent.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on my show today and talking about the product that you have created and your history, and running down some of these schemes. Super interesting to me. I think I'm happy to hear that we've seen a lot of the same stuff, and I'm happy to hear that you guys have thought about them and incorporated in. I still think that chat thing is really cool.
Well, really grateful to be partnering with you this quarter for the show, and keep up the good work you're doing, man. Like spreading the good word about bringing the fight back for fraud to the fraudsters, right?
I think that we are winning, and that's why we see them going to abuse, and that's why we see them going back to scams. We must be pissing them off enough because they're starting to give up on the carding a little bit there. So that's good news.
Yep,
Well,
totally. Awesome.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show, and everybody else. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, and we'll be seeing you all at MRC. Come see Soups, booth 210, Sardine, MRC, Las Vegas. I can't wait to see everybody there in just a couple of weeks. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks for listening to the show today. Again, I want to thank Sardine for making it all possible. Please visit them at booth 210 at the upcoming MRC to learn what all the hype is about from the Fraud Squad themselves. You can also visit one of the Fraud Squad events in Palm Springs, Charlotte, or San Francisco. To learn more about those, please visit www.sardine.ai or join their newsletter. Remember, from KYC to onboarding fraud and payment fraud, with over 4,000 signals like device, telco, email, and AML monitoring, they ship new features every week, and they are exactly who you need in your corner in your ongoing fight against fraud. Like I said at the top of the show, you're not buying just one of the best fraud tools, but the whole Fraud Squad behind it. Please visit www.sardine.ai today to learn more. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.